Hey everybody, Charlie with NHORC here. Today I'm coming at you with the first run and impressions of the Element Enduro Trailrunner that I won from RC Excitement. So thanks again for them for the raffle. So I got out there and I had my first real run with this thing. I brought it to RC Excitement. I did the chill crawl, link in the corner up here and in the description. And I got my first pack in, and I wanted to talk about my first impressions of this thing. So, first off, I got to set my own expectations here is that in the default stock form, it is a class 0 rig. So that means, this thing could be completely street legal. You wouldn't have any real problems passing inspection due to your mods, or the tires are small. So when you're thinking about this thing, you have to keep that in mind in its stock form, in that it is supposed to very much be a real car you could be driving down the road, because these tires are just simply not all that large. And that is a realistic scenario here. So at RC Excitement, there is no class 0, so I got lumped in with the class 1 trucks, which have a little bit bigger tires on there. I'm not going to go into the crazy specifics about tire size and classes and everything like that. Just not really necessary. So before we really dig into the truck, I'm just going to go over a few thoughts about the controller. Overall, for an RTR controller, it's pretty good. It's a little too big for my preferences. I really can't run it one-handed, which, if you're an RC YouTuber, is obviously a problem. But overall, it's pretty nice. There's a lot of easy to set maximums for like throttle and steering and such. But really the only ones you really use all that often are your throttle and your steering trims. So overall, it's a decent controller. But because I can't drive it one-handed, I was trying to leave myself with the stock transmitter. That way I could have a second rig if I had somebody around my house who didn't have one to drive. But since I can't run it one-handed, I'm going to have to swap this over to my Futaba T4PM. Just because I can't drive it. I guess I could do like a zip tie thing and try to make a one-handed adapter, but if you look at how far away it is, like, it'd have to, like, maybe I could do like a 3D printed thing over, but I'm not very good at designing. I'm going to take a look online to see if there's anybody who's already made that for this particular controller, the XP130, from Associated Electronics, but I don't think it's going to happen. But overall, if it's one of your first rigs, this is a solid thing. Back to the Enduro Trailrunner. So, overall impressions of it, I really like this truck. It's super fun to drive. It drives very differently and handles very differently on hard rocks. The body's not sitting quite straight here. Just, I don't have the pins on it for the ease of this video, so don't worry about the body being crooked. It wouldn't normally be crooked like this. But, so the main thing that makes it drive very differently is down here is that independent front suspension. You will notice I've got an aftermarket skid plate on there. I'll put a link to this in the description. That's just an Amazon skid plate with some TRD Pro logos on it. And when I get a little deeper in, I'll show you the rest of it. But the big thing that makes this very unique as far as how it handles is the independent front suspension, right? So most crawlers are solid front and rear axle. This one is just solid rear and with a true independent front suspension front, which is what I was so excited for about this truck. And it's really fun and really unique as far as how it drives compared to a solid axle in the front for most of the crawlers, like your TRX4 Sports and your Axial 10, 2, 3, whatever. It really does make it drive a lot differently. And the reason for that, right, is that with a solid axle, and we're going to take the body off at this point, no matter what happens, right, if one side goes up, the other goes down, always. So, that lends itself to stability in certain scenarios, but it has its drawbacks. So we'll use this masking tape as our rock, right? So when you've got a wheel up, right, especially in certain scenarios where maybe you're bound up and you're trying, that basically the side that's not getting compressed is trying to reach for the ground, and that has advantages. Now, it lends itself to a little less predictable movement as far as the difference between a solid axle, right? The solid axle, you know exactly what it's going to do. One side's going to raise and the other's going to lower, right? In this scenario, you can end up in positions where you've got both fully compressed and things like that, which can really help your grip in certain scenarios. Now, it's all kind of up to the line specifically as to if that's going to help you or hurt you. It's just different. In my opinion, it's not better or worse. It's certainly more modern. Most trucks these days, right, your standard F-150s have a solid rear and an independent front. So there's not a lot of solid front axle vehicles on the road anymore as far as real cars. So it's all a matter of preference here. I really like the difference. I had a very good time running this thing. There are some negatives, which we'll get to in a minute. Most of my issues had nothing to do with the independent front suspension, which is kind of the controversial part of these rigs, right? A lot of guys just want solid front axles, which, if that's your jam, cool. Luckily, there's a few of these out there for guys like me who want to drive an independent front suspension to get the feel for it. The only other thing I will note about the suspension is that the shocks, by default, they come with maybe like a centimeter or two of preload in all four corners. And what I found pretty much immediately was that this vehicle is not heavy enough to warrant that much preload. So, I could stick it on top of, like I actually did this. I've got a photo. If I can find it, I'll put it in, right? Where it was sitting here and it was just not compressed. It was literally like fully up almost, because the body, the chassis with or without the body was just not heavy enough to compress it. So the very first thing I did after basically no testing, just playing with it on the bench, was I ran the preload out on all four corners. So in the rear as well, it came with that preload. I will say there's some torque twist. I might put a little bit of preload back into that corner. With not a lot of reduction anywhere, it does kind of torque twist a little bit on really high grip scenarios. If you're crawling, you don't really notice it, but if you're driving around parking lots, you really do notice it pretty hard under heavy acceleration. Other things about the rig, we'll leave the biggest complaint for last. I've got two main complaints, and we'll cover those last. Other things I like, the body, right, is just Lexan, so although it's an SUV, its center of gravity doesn't seem too bad. I don't think I ever rolled it side hilling, without the body on, right? Like it's getting way over here and it's still not rolling. It still wants to fall back. I don't want to put the pins on the body to test it with that, but like the center of gravity is very low, which is nice. I think the main way that it's prone to rolling is over the front, which pretty much all RCs are, just because of the weight distribution. So I think overall the weight distribution is pretty good. It's nice to see they defaulted to a shorty battery and they mounted it far forward to give you that forward weight distribution. This thing really is pretty heavily biased towards the front, right? Like I'm lifting it in the center and it's just going right over the front. So, unlike my Traxxas TRX4 or even my Capra, like both of those, I'm running metal brass C-hubs in the front to get that forward weight distribution, to make it more realistic and to keep the front end down on climbs. This doesn't really need it from the factory, which is cool. The motor, for a brushed motor, seemed like it had plenty of power, plenty of torque. The overdrive in the front definitely helps. It's a Reedy 540 can, I believe. And I didn't feel like I was lacking for power, and I was running it on 2S to boot. So I'm running this on my drift car batteries, which are all 2S. And yeah, I mean, the top speed was a little low, but as I stated, I'm running it on drift car batteries. I mean, they're reedy batteries designed for this system. Actually, I'm running them incorrectly in an MST drift car, but even on 2S, there was plenty of torque, and I don't need the speed in a crawler. You just don't, right? A lot of crawlers are geared way too high, so I think I'm going to keep running it on 2S. I was wondering if maybe I need to pick up some 3S batteries, but I don't need to. So that's pretty nice. I'm just going to be able to use my drift car batteries for another rig, save myself some money. Really cool there. The tires overall, I am a pretty big fan of these tires. They're General Grabber tires with a pretty nice tread pattern. I will say we were running in the cold. It was 40 or 50 degrees, and they're a little hard, and I think the foams are a little too stiff again for the body. But if you're going for a scale street legal look, right, you wouldn't be running with like 10 psi in them. So I feel like you can explain away a lot of the kind of performance issues with this rig by, it looks like an inspectable vehicle you would see driving down the road, right? You're not going to see a rig sitting with 8 psi driving down the highway. So, I think the foams should be softer for performance, and I think the rubber could be a little softer, but I'm a very big fan of how these look. I mean, they look just so realistic. They've got the siping in there. They've got pretty solid tread blocks and a nice squared off shoulder, which I'm a fan of. They perform pretty well. They do clog pretty badly. There were a couple of places where there's some kind of thicker mud. It wasn't like the worst mud on the planet, but we definitely clogged up one of the tires pretty hard, pretty quick, and it took a while to get it out. I believe it was this one. This tire is definitely a little dirtier. It was this one or this one. I can't remember which. But one of these rear tires, when you get mud packed into these trenches, it takes some effort to get it out. So these tires become useless if those treads become packed, at least for crawling. So keep that in mind. All right. I think I've gotten all the things I like out of the way. Let's get to my dislikes. I'm going to start with my least big of an issue with this thing and go to my biggest issue with this thing, which is very easily remediable, is this exhaust. This exhaust is there to make it look cool. It certainly, other than the fact that I think they should have painted it silver, it looks realistic. It's even got a little muffler in here. But this thing does hit pretty much everything when you're trying to climb, right? So as you pitch back, the first thing that hits before even the bumper is that muffler, and it just loads the rear end real weird. And I understand, again, they're doing it for the scale look to be ultra realistic, but come on, it's just a problem. Now, it should be pretty fairly easily removable. It's removable, but you still end up with some weirdness. So you can unscrew the muffler from the bottom, straight up from underneath, but you still have this giant piece that hangs down, and that's one piece that you would need to then cut off if you wanted to ever put it back on. I'm not a big fan of needing to cut stuff like that. I think they should have just made an extra piece that bolted through there and used a longer screw or something. I want the scale look, but I think this has to come off. So that's my smallest problem. Easily fixable. Like I said, I'm probably going to rip that off in pretty short order. All right, then my next nitpicky issue is that the body does not quite sit easily on, as we just saw. When you go to put the body on, you kind of, you got to play find the pinholes. I don't know, maybe it's just this one and something's bent, but if the front two are down with no pins, the rears disappear. That one kind of stuck through, but it just, I don't know, maybe something's misadjusted from the factory. It's a possibility, but pins, I hate body pins, and this one seems like one of the hardest vehicles I've gotten to get the body lined up right, which is weird. It's just oddly difficult to put on. My next issue in rank of least to most problematic is the servo. So this stock servo, it doesn't have enough torque. I was really stressing it. I felt like I was going to blow it out already. Just trying to do some relatively basic lines that I don't, they're a little challenging for my TRX4 or my Capra, but they're still pretty simple. And this thing was struggling. It's slow and it's just not strong enough. So I was trying to wiggle my tires back and forth to, shimmy over some stuff. Too slow to do that. And then when it comes to the power, it's just the weight of the truck bound up in some rocks and some light binding is just completely overpowers it. So I'll run it till I blow it up, but I'm fully expecting to blow that thing up in relatively short order because it's just too weak. I thought the Traxxas servos were not strong enough, and this is like a new level of not strong enough. So that servo is pretty junk. You're going to either blow it or just replace it immediately. Regardless of, if you want to run stock or not, I think unless you're just hiking with this truck, you're going to blow that thing. If you're just like a trail runner and you just kind of walk next to the truck and do some really light stuff, you'll probably be fine. But if you were crawling this thing, if you've ever even thought about doing a comp, this thing is going to fry 100%. It's going to fry or it's going to strip. I don't know which. We'll see what happens first. I'm going to run it till one of those things happens, and then I'll change it. I'm struggling as to which of the two major issues I have with this thing are at the top of my list. They're almost a tie. One of them is purely just annoying. It has really no impact on how the truck drives, and the other is an impact issue. So I guess I have to put the annoying one in first, as less important than the one that impacts how it drives. Boy, I don't understand why they made this decision. So this ESC, it's got T-plugs. I like T-plugs. It did fine. It didn't overheat. I mean, it was a cool day. It's got pigtails for lights on it. I like that. If you're looking at it, what doesn't it have? What does it have nowhere on it, right? This is a SC480X 23S. What does it not have? A power button. This thing does not have a power button. So, you may be thinking, well, Charlie, you didn't complain about the TRX4M not having a power button. You're right, I didn't. The TRX4M has clipless removal, right? There are no body pins on that thing. It's just you can pop the body off of that thing in 2 seconds flat. Super easy. This thing has real body pins, and on top of that, from the earlier complaint, as I mentioned, right, it's hard to key the holes up with the posts. I'm hunting for the post all the time. There's a lot of tension, right? It's really sucked down there when I got the pins on. The body is not, it's not the worst thing to get on and off, but the front two are fine, but these guys, right, you're dealing with the roof rack if you put the roof rack on, and I don't even have any of the scale accessories on the roof rack that are going to go on it yet. So you're trying to get these out, dealing with the crossbars and the roof rack. So if I just want to turn the battery on or off, I have to take the body off, or I have to fold the Lexan way over the side, which I don't want to do because it's got these channels to hold it, right? These running boards do have channels. You do have to be careful. That definitely contributes to some of the problems with the body, is that they want the body stuck down in these side rails, which holds it together, keeps the body good, right? I don't really have a problem with that. Why the hell is there not a power button? It's such a simple thing that would cost them cents. I can't imagine it would cost a company like Reedy more than a nickel to put a power button right here, right? There's all this open space you can get to from underneath on any of the sides, but there's no power button. Even if it was just on the thing, right, you could reach up under and push the side under the body, even if it was on the actual unit. With no power button and with LEDs in the front, you have to take the entire body off, because you're not going to be able to unplug a T-plug from the battery from under the body without, you're just not going to do it. It's just not possible. So, giant annoyance. It's so annoying that I already have a Hobbywing 1080 that I picked up from RC Excitement at the crawl, like one event of not having a power button, and this thing is out. So I wanted to stay on stock electronics, until I blew them up to just save myself money, right? This is a free truck. I should not be spending money. I'm trying to build a house right now. And, luckily the Hobbywing 1080 is one of the best ESCs on the market for a brushed motor, and it's $40. So it's cheap, and it comes with a placeable power button, which is going to go like right here. That way I can get to it real easy. So what are you thinking, Enduro? What are you thinking, Reedy? Not putting a power button on your ESCs and forcing people to unplug their batteries. You either put a power button in or you put an easy to remove body on. You don't do neither. With neither, it's just like, cool, I'm going to forget and I'm going to toast a battery and then I'm going to be out a $50 battery because you didn't put a power button in and I forgot to turn the thing off because I went, I got to take the body pins off. And I don't want to do that right now. And then it sits on the table and you forget, and then you get a dead battery. So shame on y'all, Reedy, for not putting a power button on it and making me spend $45 to replace a ostensibly fine ESC because you didn't put a power button on. I can't believe that was the choice they decided to make. Because again, the TRX-4M is a great example. Like, you can take the TRX, here, I'll go get it. Watch, we'll go get the TRX-4M from my pile of RCs, which I do have my shelf set up here with most of my RCs. I've got some there. The garage is slowly getting re-cleaned. The X-Max, the drift car under that cool loud design shell, and then my Sport over there. TRX-4M, no power button. You have to plug the battery in. Why is it not a problem? I'm holding the camera with one hand. No problem, right? Cool. I can take that off with one hand in 5 seconds and put it back on instantly, and I'm done. So unplugging it from the ESC in this scenario is not a problem. Problem. Not a problem. Put power buttons on your ESCs, company, unless you've got really easy to remove bodies. Team Associated knows this, actually. Like, if you're looking over here, right, you've got the Losi Razor Ray, right? This body is a nightmare to take off. They know that, right? It's got miserable body pins. They're underneath. They're in the back. What did they do? What's that? That's a power button. What are you guys doing over there? You're the same parent company. You should know to put power buttons where they're easily reachable. That way people don't kill their batteries sitting there because they didn't want to fiddle with all your pins. Like, I don't really hold the pins against the Razor Ray because it's such a unique body style that would have been much harder to do, to get into. This is so, like, put buttons on. Sorry, this rant has gone really long. Final issue, moving on. Biggest problem with this crawler, ground clearance. Ground clearance and how they designed the front bulkhead. So, one of the issues with the ground clearance is the fact that it is Class 0. So I'm not going to hold the tire size against it, right? I can go up to Class 1 tires. I'm probably going to see if I can do that, although I want to see if I can do it without trimming the body, and we're already getting some contact at extreme flex. So I think I have a pair of Class 1 tires around here somewhere I'm going to dig out and see if I can eyeball them to see if they fit. So I'm not holding the tire size against it for the ground clearance. But the front design of this bulkhead is silly, and I know it has to be different for an independent front suspension. So first off, you've got this wall in the front. I don't really mind the wall, although I think that metal skid plates are absolutely required for this vehicle. If you do not have a metal skid plate on this vehicle, you are going to be going through the outermost plastic layer just left and right if you're doing any real crawling. So we're going to flip the rig over here. All right, so you can see the rest of this Amazon skid plate set I got. It's actually two different plates, this one and this one. Links in the description below. It's got this nice TRD off-road logo that's definitely not licensed by Toyota, but don't worry about it. So I put these on before I ran it, like, basically at all. In my unboxing video, I didn't have them on, but that's literally the only time I ran it, and it's like 5 minutes without it. So just before I start talking, Again, this was like literally one battery pack. Look at how beat up this thing is. And I don't like bash my crawlers. Like, look at the number of scratches that are on this thing. It's insane. Like, there's just so many scratches along the entire length of it because the ground clearance is such a problem. And again, class 1 zero tires, even the rear links, like, yeah, that's obvious why they're metal, because they had to be. Like, those things have taken a giant beating. Even the frame rails, I mean, look, you can see the frame rails there. Like, my TRX4 has some frame rail scuffing on it at this point, but it's 4 years old and I run that thing hard constantly. Like, this thing, I would expect that level of scratches from, I don't know, dozens of battery packs, and it's already there. Maybe not dozens, I guess it depends on how you run it, but like, holy crap. What I was finding was the real issue. You would think it might be, oh, this giant wall in the front, right? This really isn't that big of an issue. You can see, like, yeah, I've got a few hits up there, but they're mostly right along the bottom edge. Like, there's a couple, but if you're being careful with your driving, you should be hitting things with the tires and not with the front. Because if you're doing that, like, you're never getting over it if you hit a rock with that, right? You need to hit the rock with your tire. This slope right here is very problematic. So, other rigs, obviously there's some drop. I think they should have tried to find some design that lowered this center part between the independent front suspension a little, like something. I don't know. Portals, maybe? Like, yeah, I don't really want portals on this rig, but like, portals would give you a little more ground clearance. But even if you had the ground clearance, this design, like, this spot is so flat. And with the stock servo and the stock motor, I had multiple times, and I had multiple times just in the course of the comp run that I did with this thing, where I got so high centered that I had to hand a got it and touch it and take a 10-point deduction because I got stuck right here with all four wheels in the air. And I've never had that happen where I couldn't wiggle my way out of a high center with any of my other crawlers, even the small stuff, like even the TRX4M or the SCX24s. Like, I've never gotten so high centered that I had to push the rig off in the middle of a comp. And I think it happened twice. It definitely happened once in the comp. It might have happened twice, but then I did a lot of running after. We were hanging around. I was waiting for Tyler to, do his run before we left, and I got it high centered like that 2 or 3 more times after the fact in one battery pack. And you get stuck up there, and you can't go backwards because of this slope, right? Like, if you've got a rock sitting right here, it's like you're sitting on a brick. Like, you can't go up the thing, you can't go down it. Like, you just get stuck. And I don't know what the solution is, really. Like, because, you've got the, sorry if this isn't focusing right first time with this. You've got your drive shafts under here, and they're trying to stabilize the front end for the independent front suspension by having this whole plastic piece that's under my skid plate run up. And yes, I am losing a little bit of ground clearance with the skid plate, sure, right? Like, I'm losing, I don't know, 2 millimeters of distance with the skid plate set. So, I think the first thing from the factory is that the part that's under this skid plate should be metal. This piece should be metal. The piece that's between the front suspension should be metal, and this front plate should be metal from the factory. So, like, I went with bolt overs because it's usually easy, but given this thing's ground clearance problems, I may actually go ahead and look into buying aluminum replacement parts and ditching the skid plates entirely and going to the parts that are aluminum to get that very minor amount of ground clearance back. Because, yeah, I'm losing 2 millimeters of ground clearance, and it's apparently crucial on this thing. So that's the first thing they could have done. Like, I wish they could redesign some of the geometry to make this high spot a little, give it a little more ground clearance. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I've never gotten completely high centered in multiple years of comping with different trucks. I don't think I've ever seen anybody high center so bad that they had to push the truck off of the rock when they were completely upright and take a 10-point deduction, which is really disappointing. Enduro needs to make this piece aluminum, make this piece aluminum, and make this piece aluminum. But really, I think they should try to find a way to slick this front end down. Because, yeah, you got ground clearance problems, right? Like, if we settle the truck, like, and again, yeah, the bigger tires would help this for sure. But, I mean, that's maybe an inch of clearance right here. And in the center, right, like, it's just so flat. It high centers perfectly and gets completely stuck. Like, you can see that, like, this lip, and again, yes, I'm losing a little ground clearance with my skid plate, but, like, that lip right there is just impossible to overcome if you have a rock lined right up with it. And then the backside, like, yeah, I'm not quite sitting on the, I'm sitting on the links, but I'm not exactly, but it's such a perfectly shaped thing to get stuck with all four wheels, like, off the ground, even with that independent front suspension reaching down to touch the ground, right? Like, say you got one up, like, for some reason that other side's still reaching down to touch the ground. Maybe if it was a solid axle, right, you'd be getting more pressure, because if you do that in the rear, right, you reach down, one flexes up, it pushes weight into the opposite tire to help give you some more. But it's a problem. I don't know. And I don't know how to fix it. I'm going to have to do some research. If you've got any suggestions for me on how to fix my high centering problem with this rig, please leave them in the comments. I've been kind of railing against this thing now for a bit longer. This video is longer now than I had intended it to be. But overall, I do like the rig. I am very happy with the rig overall, despite my 20 minutes of railing against high centering and power buttons, which maybe I'll cut some of it out. But it's a super fun rig overall. I've got some scale accessories to go on the roof. Like I said, I've got the Hobbywing 1080 that's going to be going in. I hope you've liked this video on my first thoughts on the Element Enduro. Running it in a full-blown comp is a great way to really test out a truck in a hurry. Because you've got someone whose job, in this case, because it's a hobby shop, their literal job was to try to defeat everybody. There were a couple gates on that track that were diabolical as far as how hard they were. And it's a great way to put a truck through its paces for its, I want to figure out what's wrong with it. I figured out what problems I had with it right out the gate. So, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this rambling video. I'll probably cut a little bit of it down in post. But, yeah, I love the truck overall. I would recommend it as a buy to anybody who wants an independent front suspension rig and who likes scale looks, right? Because it drives very realistically to a 1-1 version of any truck with a solid rear and an independent front. And it's very fun to drive, but you're just not going to be super competitive out of the box. I mean, I guess you never are out of the box in most classes, unless there's a stock class, which I don't have one, but that I can run in. But yeah, it's a fun truck. There's some quirks. One of them is real easy to fix, right? I'm throwing the Hobbywing 1080 at it. But the ground clearance issue, I'm going to have to noodle on. So if you've got suggestions, like I said, leave them in the comments. Please give me suggestions on how to fix my high centering problem on this bad boy. Because I want to run it more. I just don't want to get stuck on everything on the planet. So please like, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.